If there's one thing that we all know to be true about Kirby, it's that he's a Riz god. He's always stacking paper, but sometimes his fit goes from sheesh to... What am I doing? Dude watches one frugal aesthetic video and thinks he's a fashion expert.
Put some waves on him.
For the most part, the Kirby copyability hats are great, but that's not always the case. I've picked out some of my least favorite copyability hats, in no particular order, that I think represent Kirby's biggest fashion faux pas. Is fashion truly subjective, or is there a method or pattern to what just doesn't work on Kirby? There's only one way to find out. Real quick, if you like Kirby content and want to see me make more, be sure to like and subscribe. And once you're finished with this video, I recommend checking out my follow-up covering the best Kirby hats throughout the Kirby series. But there won't be any positivity here, because these are the worst Kirby hats. According to me. And only me. It's important to recognize what aspects and elements can make a Kirby hat underwhelming. It's easy to say, I don't like this hat, but it's a bit tougher and certainly more interesting to say, I don't like this hat because... Starting with a specific example of a Kirby hat I'm not too overly fond of, and one that will certainly get me in a good amount of hot water with the fans, Cutter Kirby. Cutter Kirby's hat is iconic. It's been practically unchanged from its initial debut in Kirby Superstar, and Cutter itself remains among the most recurring Kirby abilities. But here's something I doubt most players have put much thought into. Heck, I certainly hadn't before I started working on this video. What is Cutter Kirby's hat supposed to be? The wings on the side, along with the placement of the eyes above the visor, certainly evoke avian imagery. It's a bird hat with a big blade through the top. But why? I typically praise Kirby hats for creativity, but usually they still find a way to relate to the ability's core concept. Take away the blade from Kirby's hat, and what about this ability makes you think it's Kirby wielding a sharpened boomerang? To my knowledge, this hat doesn't have any clear design inspiration. Like, I've seen winged headgear in Dr. Slump and a blade lodged in a headpiece from but why combine the two? I appreciate the creativity, and I certainly like this hat simply for how iconic it is to the Kirby series, but its design is baffling to say the least. Similar to Cutter, and another ability that I'm sure will draw the ire from Kirby fans with its inclusion in this video, I think Beam Kirby's hat is kind of weak too. It's a jester hat, which is cute, and even appeared on the box art for Kirby Superstar. But like Cutter, I think there's a decent disconnect between the hat and the ability. I wouldn't say I'm the most familiar with medieval fantasy settings, but when I think of magic wands and beams and such, my mind initially goes to mages and wizards, and not jesters. Well, would you look at that? Again, this hat has remained a staple in the Kirby series, so I like it just fine, but comparing it to the Beam Mage hat from the Kirby Clash spin-offs, I kind of wish this was just the default hat. The Witch's hat is sleek, stylish, and has the Kirby charm with the adorable star ribbon. And the wand even has more of an arcane feel than Beam Kirby's typical basic wand. It may not be fair to compare these two designs since they were introduced 21 years apart from each other, and one had to work for much more limited hardware. Still, the Beam Mage hat makes me wish we had something like it in the main series, and I don't even know if that's a shared sentiment because I'm one of like 3 people to ever bring up Team Kirby Clash Deluxe past its release year. Following a similar sentiment to my feelings towards Beam Kirby, we moved to one of the most forgettable and lackluster abilities. Paint Kirby. Like Beam, I think Paint has a much more creative and just overall better hat design seen in the Kirby series that should be used instead of the generic gray cap, since it's just an easy recolor of Wheel and Yo-Yo's hat, and I think it could have afforded to have been a little more exciting. Now, the obvious place to look for a better version of Paint Kirby's hat is with Artist Kirby, a copy ability introduced in Kirby Star Allies with pretty much the same concept. And while Artist is one of my favorite hats in the series, I think there's one that fits Paint's specific chaotic screen nuke even better. In fact, it's so fitting that it's been in front of you this entire time, and I doubt you even noticed. If I may direct your attention to Paint Kirby's ability icon, you'll see Kirby wearing a paint bucket. Are you kidding me? That's so simple yet so funny and quirky, and fits this explosive ability so perfectly. And it's from the same game Paint debuted in. I'm not mad, just disappointed. Speaking of disappointment, yeah, it was only a matter of time before I brought this one up. What's up, Bell Kirby? If you've seen my other videos, this ability always finds a way to piss me off. It's the arch nemesis of the Silvery channel. My Ned Flanders, my Dinkelberg, my Eugene Krabs. Well, you guys didn't root for Plankton? He was always fighting against big business and capitalist greed. Anyway. You may be thinking that I just put Bell on this list because of my predisposed bias against it, and you're completely right. Bell Kirby has done nothing wrong, but if I don't complain about it, I'd be doing this channel a disservice. On the real, Bell Kirby's hat is a little lacking for me by the standard I hold modern Kirby hats to. Like, it's cute, but it's just Kirby wearing a bell. I'm not asking for anything super fancy, but maybe a music-themed or possibly even a festive designed hat would make it stand out more. And the two handbells Kirby uses as weapons are completely devoid of personality. It's not required that every weapon-based ability needs to have a super creative weapon. Just look at sword, archer, staff. But when they're just more simplistic versions of the big thing Kirby's got on his cranium, it just kind of bogs down the entire design for me. Adios for now, Bell Kirby. I'm sure I'll find something new to complain about soon. Moving from one weapon-based ability to another, but not for the reason you would think, let's talk about Hammer Kirby. Or rather, let's talk about Kirby's hammer. The actual hat that Hammer Kirby wears is fine. It's nothing extravagant, but the Hachimaki is a symbol of courage in Japanese culture, so it fits Hammer pretty well. But Hammer doesn't just come with a hat, it comes with a hammer. This opens up an interesting question. Should the hammer be considered part of Kirby's hat? On the one hand, it's an accessory that is intrinsically tied to Hammer Kirby's design and gameplay. But on the other hand, it's not a hat. Hammer Kirby's hat is perfectly fine, but what is it about the hammer that made me even consider it on this list? After all, for a big cartoony hammer with a star design, it's great. So great, in fact, that Kirby shouldn't be using it. This glorious design, refined and elegant as it is only fit to be wielded by a king, dare I say, the king. Kirby wielding a hammer with the exact same design as DDD's signature weapon cheapens the specialness of it. It's like if Sword Kirby used Meta Knight's sword, it completely takes something away from what makes DDD stand out on his own. Now, more often than not in the modern Kirby games, King Dedede's boss fights involve him using different weapons or not even using his hammer at all, so this design overlap probably doesn't matter to most. We can still associate King Dedede with his jet hammer or his rippling muscles, but I just wish Kirby's hammer was designed differently in some way to allow both the king and his buddy to stand out on their own. We talked about one ability that was connected to Kirby's friends, so let's shift on over to another. Sword Kirby. Nah, I'm just kidding, this one's pretty good. Spear Kirby, on the other hand, this one's just boring. Red headband, gold crest. It works perfectly fine, but it never really stood out to me, especially compared to the other new abilities in Kirby's Return to Dream Land. I don't think Kirby should don a bandana to match his pal Bandana Waddle Dee, but I think something like a Roman or Spartan style helmet would have been really fun. Spear's headband is inoffensive and fine, but it's gotta be one of, if not, the most boring hat. Maybe the most boring hat is an overstatement. After all, look at Missile. To be fair, a cap resembling the cone of the missile nose provides a good connection between Kirby's missile and non-missile forms. But comparing it to another transformation ability, Wheel, I think Missile could have done something a bit more creative with its hat. Maybe Kirby could wear a pilot helmet with a pair of goggles, or perhaps a military helmet. As it stands, Missile Kirby is a safe but sterile hat, and while it's completely fitting, it's far from the most exciting. But if there's one thing worse than having a boring hat, it's wearing a hat that's honestly lame. Now, Kirby's a little fashionista. He usually only wears the freshest drip, and even if it's whack, he can pull it off just fine. That being said, This is a shower cap. What are you doing, my guy? I know the appeal of Bubbles' hat comes more from the mountain of bubbles on Kirby's head and not the vessel with which they're presented in, but no amount of visual stimulation will get me to think that this is an okay fit. Buddy rolled out of the shower and just left the house a soapy mess. Does Kirby bathe? Has that ever been questioned before? This is an egregious hat, and one that needs to be clowned on more often. As much as I love when elemental-based abilities have hats that are more creative than the standard elemental crown, this was certainly not the direction to take it. It's a freaking shower cap, dude. Do better, Kirby. We're about to get to the bottom of the barrel, but before we stoop that low, let's talk about a hat that's not really all that bad, just boring and confusing. Needle Kirby. This ability has had a bit of a renaissance thanks to Kirby in the Forgotten Land, but its hat is still as plain Jane as ever. I don't really have too much issue with the hat itself. It's fine and it's functional, at least that's what I initially thought. Needle Kirby has several attacks where the spines protrude all over Kirby's body, and if the spines are being controlled through Kirby's body, is this anything more than a pink cap with some holes? It's tough to tell where the hat stops and Kirby's ability starts, but regardless of this hat's logistics, its overall design is pretty uninteresting and flat. One last pair of hats before I talk about the absolute worst Kirby hat, Stone and Ninja. Now, you're probably thinking, these hats are great. They convey their abilities really well and creatively, and they don't have much, if any, design overlap. So why would I bring them up together? Stone and Ninja were among the abilities that first appeared in Kirby Superstar, the first game to feature Kirby's iconic hats. A lot of hats in this game are just palette swaps of each other, which is understandable given the Super Nintendo's memory limitations. Stone and Ninja share essentially the same hat in this game, just in a different color, but I don't think it fits either of them at all. In Kirby Superstar, Stone and Ninja's hat is a samurai helmet. Listen, I like samurai, I like Kirby, I even like Samurai Kirby. But as a hat for Ninja Kirby, Samurai and Ninjas are different, almost complete opposites when it comes to ideals, status, fighting styles. And as for Stone Kirby, I can't even forge the slightest connection between Samurai and Stone aside from statues, but that's a stretch so far. Gooey's tongue can't reach it. Never mind, I will never doubt my boy again. With those hats out of the way, let's talk about what I think is the worst, most underwhelming, most bland, most visually confusing, and ultimately irrelevant hat found throughout the Kirby series. If you told me you forgot about this hat, I'd completely understand because it's that forgettably bad. But allow me to pose this question. What is Ball Kirby's hat supposed to be? The Kirby fandom wiki postulates that it's the shell of a red and blue ball, which, sure, I guess? But that's certainly making some big assumptions on what is basically just a cap that doesn't even matter because it completely vanishes when Kirby's in ball form. It's such a boring, nothing hat that doesn't seem to be based on anything. But at least, it's a hat. Sure, Kirby's had some absolute stinkers in regards to his wardrobe, and some that bother me, but I can see why others like them. There are confusing hats, there are boring hats, there are unappealing hats, but then there's the greatest sin a copy ability can commit. Not having a hat at all. Light Kirby is an ability that only gets brought up when people want to talk about how bad it is. And oh hey, would you look at the title of the video? This one doesn't have a hat. Sure, it's a one-time use ability, but plenty of other one-time use abilities have hats, so there's no excuse here. Now, one ability I can kind of excuse is Smash Bros. Kirby, since, I mean, this is what Kirby looks like in Smash Bros. It's a pretty faithful design in that regard, and it's hard to pick one element from Smash to convey in a hat. My suggestion would be a headband like Kirby wears when he copies the Mii fighters, just with the Smash logo instead of the Mii's head. But ultimately, there's not much that can really be done for this one. Parasol has been a recurring and prominent ability since Kirby's Adventure, and it somehow has gone this entire time without a hat. How is that even possible? I know this ability is represented by its cute signature parasol, but you don't see Sword or Hammer Kirby walking around in the buff, riding off the design of their signature weapon. And before you comment that Hammer lacked a hat in Kirby Superstar, that was very quickly rectified, while Parasol still somehow doesn't have a hat to call its own. Give Kirby a rain cap or one of those umbrella hats, or draw inspiration from Japanese tradition and base it on the Teru Teru Bozu dolls. Anything would be better than what we currently have going on for Parasol Kirby. And would you believe me if I said it got even worse? Because while Parasol might not have a hat, at least the simple design of the parasol itself is charming, and it's functional for a lot of really cool and strong attacks. Maybe I can forgive it for not having a hat, but there's one ability that will never get even a shred of appreciation from me. In my ranking every Kirby copy ability video, I ranked Metal as the 4th worst copy ability, and quite honestly, I think I was being too generous. Metal Kirby is the least fun ability to use in the Kirby series, and no amount of invulnerability will change that. And not only does it clearly not have a hat, but this lack of quirky headgear of any kind is the single specific reason this ability is as unbearable as it is. Metal Kirby is in this metallic form all of the time. It's not something you can turn on and off like stone or wheel. This is the design that was chosen for Metal Kirby. And because of that, Metal Kirby has to move at a snail's pace at all times. This could have been avoided had Metal been a transformation ability with a funny hat, but alas, it was doomed to mediocrity before it was even programmed into the game. Also, everything I just said applies to Mini as well, but I mean, it's Mini Kirby, who cares about that one? And one final ability to close out this video before I get back to playing the recently released Kirby's Return to Dream Land Deluxe. It's not my least favorite, nor is it the most egregious hat, but I think this will go down as my least popular opinion in this video. And it just so happens to be a new ability from the latest Kirby game. Hear me out. I'm not the biggest fan of Mecha Kirby's design. Mecha is a really cool ability, and its attacks certainly look quite super, and there's a lot about the design that's cute and creative, but it just feels a little too busy for me. There's a lot of different design elements to this one. A helmet, visor, cannons, gauntlets, and it's a little much for a guy like Kirby who typically keeps his wardrobe slick and simple. Maybe this is just a bit of culture shock to my old traditional soul, and I need to get with the times if abilities going forward are going to have this level of detail. It's big, it's bulky, but hey, if that's what the kids are into these days, I'm sure this one's a favorite. Not for me though, I'll take a backwards hat over this any day. So, what elements make a subpar Kirby hat? The main point I fault copy ability hats for is a lack of vision, and this relates to a number of things. Perhaps a hat doesn't properly connect to its ability. Maybe it matches the ability perfectly fine, but lacks the charm and creativity it needs to reach the higher echelon of Kirby hats. Some hats don't make the mark because they're too simple, some because they're too out there, and sometimes it's a freaking shower cap, dude. Even the worst of the worst Kirby hats still have things to enjoy, and I think that's great. Just because I rag on a hat, that doesn't mean another person can't find their own value in it. Fashion is art, and art is inherently subjective. These differences in opinions lead to conversation, and a better understanding between people on an individual level. A Kirby copy ability hat can be bland. It can be frustrating, but it will never be without value. Except for Metal Kirby. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't, and check out my video on the best Kirby hats. Then we can all get back to playing Kirby's Return to Dream Land Deluxe. Cool? Cool.